Jason had a woman he liked when he was young. When she returned home after divorce, I was left forgotten in a heavy rain. That day, I borrowed an umbrella from a passing cleaner. Then I went to the airport and randomly bought the nearest flight. I thought it would be fine to go anywhere as long as there were no Jason and Monica. At 6 o'clock, Jason's car returned home. It was the servant who came out to greet him instead of his wife Vivian. Only then did Jason remember that because he was worried about Monica, he had forgotten to pick her up at the market. But it doesn't matter. His wife is gentle and never gets angry over such small matters. At 7 o'clock, the rain stopped. It was very dark, but Vivian still hadn't returned home. Jason began to feel inexplicably flustered. He called her 3 times. The first time there was no answer. For the second and third times, he couldn't get through anymore. That rainstorm came suddenly, and it seemed that the sky darkened in an instant. I ran somewhat in a sorry state to take shelter from the rain under the eaves by the roadside, looking at the pouring rain all over the sky in a somewhat dazed way. An hour ago, Jason said he would come to pick me up and take me home. But now, there is still no sign of him. The girls taking shelter from the rain beside me were picked up one after another. Their boyfriends or husbands tilted their umbrellas over their heads as much as possible and took great care of them. I think Jason must be taking such great care to protect Monica at this moment too. The woman he liked when he was young. Later, they missed each other by some strange turn of events. I heard that she suffered a lot of grievances after marriage. In these 3 months of the divorce lawsuit, Monica's mother also passed away. Jason often lies awake at night worrying and sighing, and today is the day when Monica finally gets divorced successfully and returns home. In the morning, after Jason took a bath, he changed into a newly tailored suit. On the matching tie, there are light patterns of datura. After marriage, I took care of all his daily needs. But that tie was not bought by me. The rain was falling ceaselessly, as lively as frying beans. But my heart seemed to suddenly become quiet. Auntie. I smiled and waved to the passing cleaner. I exchanged the newly bought seafood for the old umbrella in the aunt's hand. Seeing her extremely happy, I couldn't help but curve up the corners of my mouth. The umbrella is very old, but it can keep out wind and rain. It is better than the man who never comes. I walked out of the market and casually hailed a taxi by the roadside. When I arrived at the airport, I realized that I didn't have a place to go. I only have one grandma left. But if I go to find her, the old lady will know that I must have been wronged. In the end, I randomly bought the nearest flight. I thought it would be good to go anywhere as long as there were no Jason and Monica. Just before boarding the plane, my phone suddenly rang. The call was from Jason. I thought about it and didn't answer. When the ringtone stopped, I put his number on the blacklist. Jason returned home at 6 o'clock. When the car came to a stop, only the servant came to greet him. He paused. After taking off his coat, instead of handing it to the servant, he draped it over his arm. Where's my wife? Madam hasn't come back yet. Jason's steps stopped. Only then did he remember that Vivian had gone to the market on a whim to buy live seafood. He had said he would pick her up and go home together. But Monica fainted from crying in front of her mother's grave. In his haste to send Monica to the hospital, he forgot about picking her up. Jason glanced at the pouring rain outside. A vague sense of guilt welled up in his heart. Would Vivian be angry? But as soon as this thought surfaced, Jason shook his head with a smile. He had never seen a person with a softer and more generous temperament than his wife. She would never get angry over such a small matter. Sir, I see that you got caught in the rain. You'd better go upstairs and take a hot bath quickly. The servant reminded in a low voice. Jason nodded. When my wife comes back, tell her I'm upstairs. He went upstairs and took a hot bath. But somehow, even taking this bath made him feel a bit restless. Coming out of the bathroom, he felt a bit stuffy in his nose. When he wanted to take a cold medicine, he couldn't find the medicine box. Jason looked at his watch. It was almost 7 o'clock, and Vivian still hadn't returned. The rain outside seemed to have stopped, but the sky was even darker. He took out his mobile phone and called Vivian. The ringtone rang for a long time, but no one answered until it finally hung up by itself. Jason frowned. This was an unprecedented phenomenon. Vivian would never miss his call. Perhaps there was a traffic jam due to the heavy rain and a small accident on the road? Jason felt his heart suddenly tighten. He quickly made a second call. But the phone that could still be reached just now couldn't be connected. His eyebrows furrowed even deeper, and his expression gradually turned cold. But he still patiently made a third call. Still unable to get through. He stood there holding his mobile phone for a long time. Then he casually searched on the internet. Oh, it turned out that in his situation, he had been put on the blacklist by the other party. Jason suddenly laughed in anger. He felt that he should take back the words, I have never seen a person with a softer and more generous temperament than his wife. When the plane landed in that strange city, it was already late at night. As the signal was restored, new messages came in one after another on my phone. I noticed that several text messages had been sent from an unfamiliar number. Hello, Vivian. I'm Monica. I heard that you and Jason are angry and having a tiff because of me and you haven't come home yet. I'm very worried and sorry. I think I need to explain to you about me and Jason. He did like me, but that was all when we were kids. Jason has always called me elder sister, and I also regarded him as a younger brother. Because of me, there is a rift between you two. This is really not what I want to see. No one wants Jason to be happy more than I do. Vivian, after receiving my text message, can you call Jason back? Or at least, let us know that you are safe. I found it very ridiculous. If they are very worried about my safety, there are countless ways. With Jason's family background, it is extremely easy to find my identity information. But after I left home, it wasn't the police who looked for me first. It was Monica. I am really sick and tired of it. Monica will soon know about any little disturbance in my life. I didn't reply, but Monica was very persistent and she called me. I pressed answer. There was silence at the other end of the phone. After a moment, suddenly there was a very low laugh. Then Monica's voice came, "It turns out that you are not as good as Jason said. You are really patient. It took 3 years before you started making a fuss, Vivian." Monica suddenly called my name. "Since you are willing to vacate your position on your own initiative, I will ask Jason to give you more alimony." I smiled. Monica has been divorced once and has gone through a difficult divorce lawsuit. Presumably you are very experienced. Then I'll leave it to you. If I get a lot of money, I'll invite Monica for coffee. After saying that, I directly hung up the phone. Then I blacklisted the number and set up interception for all unfamiliar calls. On the 3rd day since Vivian left home, Jason made a call to her grandma who was thousands of miles away. After some small talk, he tentatively said, "Grandma, Vivian said a few days ago that she wanted to go back and see you. No need to come back. I'm fine. It's such a long way. Don't go through the trouble." Jason held his phone tightly. On the huge terrace, he could see the setting sun in the west. And his heart seemed to sink little by little along with that sun. He knew that Vivian only had this one relative left. So he naturally thought that she must be sulking with him and had temporarily gone back to her grandma. But she hadn't gone there. So, where had Vivian been these days? He turned around and saw that familiar dressing table at a glance. The dressing table was as clean as ever, but her comb hadn't been put away in time. He walked over and picked it up. There were a few long hairs tangled on the comb. Vivian's hair was very good and very black. She had never had it permed or dyed. He held that comb, lost in deep thought and a trance. Monica's call came for the second time before he came to his senses. "Jason, I just passed by your garden and saw that the roses have all withered." Monica's gentle voice came, "Let the gardener clean it up. It's very ugly." "No need." For the first time, he directly refused Monica. Monica was obviously stunned for a moment, but soon said again, "Jason, are you angry?" "Yes. This is your and Vivian's home. Naturally, you are in charge." There was a sob in Monica's trailing voice. Jason's heart softened again. "I didn't mean that, sister. Is there still no news of Vivian?" "No, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have come back," Monica cried softly. Jason listened to that faint crying and for some reason felt a little impatient. Vivian seldom cried. Only on the night of their wedding, because of the pain, she cried in his arms for a while. And in the first year of their marriage, he missed her birthday. It seemed that at that time, because Monica's husband was violent and he was too worried, he went abroad overnight. Jason was inexplicably a little annoyed. In 3 years of marriage, he had never known that Vivian had such a stubborn and willful side. He walked to the bed and sat down. After thinking for a long time, he still decided to call Vivian's only good friend. The friend was very surprised and said that she hadn't received a call from her. Vivian hadn't gone to her city either. When Jason hung up the phone, his hand was trembling a little. He lit a cigarette but didn't smoke it. Vivian was a bit of a neat freak. When she was at home, there was not the slightest peculiar smell in any corner of the whole house. The phone rang again, but it was a strange landline. In the past, he would never answer such calls. But this time, he pressed the answer button at the first time. "Hello." His voice was a little tremulous. "Jason, it's me, Vivian." For some reason, when Vivian's familiar voice rang out, Jason, who was usually taciturn, was inexplicably a bit sharp-tongued at this moment. "Vivian, you're not a 3-year-old child. Is running away from home such a childish thing, something people of your age should do? Do you know what negative impact it will have on the Gu family if this gets out?" "I'm sorry." Jason clutched his phone and loosened his tie. But he felt that the heavy boulder in his heart had suddenly been removed. "If you know you're wrong, come back quickly." His tone became milder again. "Jason, I'm calling you for something else." "What's the matter?" "I sent you something. Calculating the time, you should have received it." "What kind of thing needs to be sent? Wouldn't it be fine if you brought it back when you come home?" Vivian still had that gentle and calm tone. I'm not going home anymore. Please pay attention to signing for the express delivery. If there is no objection after reading it, please sign it. I will call you again in 2 days. This phone is borrowed from someone else. Don't call again. I won't be able to answer it. Vivian, what do you mean? Jason only felt that his heart, which had just relaxed a bit, suddenly tightened again. Jason didn't speak. Vivian didn't speak either, seemingly politely waiting for his reply. Where are you now? This is not important. Jason glanced at the silent twilight outside the window. At the other end of the phone, Vivian didn't say another word. She seemed to laugh softly. Then, she directly hung up the phone. Jason almost instinctively called back immediately. But the person who answered the phone again was already a strange aunt. She spoke in a dialect from an unknown place, and Jason couldn't understand it. He could only apologize and then hang up. The deep twilight descended, and he just sat there in the deep twilight, motionless. Jason turned and walked to the dressing table and put down the comb that he had been holding all along. He saw himself in the mirror. His brows were tightly furrowed, and there was a cloud of anger in his eyes. Jason quickly returned to his usual expressionless face. He stepped out of the master bedroom and went downstairs. Monica called him in the living room downstairs, and he only responded faintly. He asked the servant to bring over the packages received today. Jason picked out the letter sent by Vivian from among them and opened it. Monica stood aside and covered her mouth with a low exclamation. Jason expressionlessly tore up the divorce agreement and threw it into the trash can. Jason, Monica stepped forward and gently tugged at his sleeve, gently persuading. Don't be angry. Vivian should just be acting on impulse. She has always been gentle and sensible. It seems that it's still my fault. If I didn't return to the country and didn't trouble you with these things, she wouldn't be sulking. Jason's voice was slightly cold. What does it have to do with you? It's her own immaturity. Isn't it because you spoiled her if she is immature? Monica forced a smile. Jason sneered. Why did I marry her in the first place? Others may not know, but don't you know? Monica looked at him tearfully and stunned. Jason didn't answer, just gently pulled back his sleeve. I have something to go out. Do you want the driver to take you back or stay here? Monica wiped away her tears. I'll wait for you here. You and Vivian are in such a mess. I won't be able to sleep even if I go back. Jason nodded, instructed the servant to clean up the guest room. Then he asked the driver to prepare the car and left. Monica watched him leave. Then she glanced at the torn divorce agreement in the trash can. She pursed her lips tightly and slowly sat down on the sofa. I knew from the day I left. For Jason, finding the whereabouts of a person is extremely easy. It all depends on whether he wants to or not. So, when I saw Jason downstairs at the homestay, I wasn't very surprised. In the early autumn weather, he was wearing a light gray thin windbreaker and leaning against the car body, smoking. He is handsome and tall, and his every move is very eye-catching. In contrast, I seem extremely ordinary. Wearing a loose cotton and linen long skirt and casually tying up my long hair with a handkerchief. Without makeup and carrying a shopping bag from the supermarket. I am more like a little nanny in the old Gu family house. When I first got married to him, I often felt inferior. But now, I have already figured it out. Just like home-cooked stir-fries can never be on the table of a luxurious banquet. Jason and I were wrong from the very beginning. He stubbed out his cigarette and looked at me with a calm expression. I also put down the shopping bag that was cutting into my hand. Jason looked at his watch and spoke with his usual deep and cold voice. Go and pack your things. 30 minutes should be enough. Have you signed? I stretched out my hand to him. Give me the divorce agreement, and I'll go back with you to go through the formalities. Jason's indifferent eyes still showed no emotion. Only the color of his pupils became a bit darker. Now is not the right time to announce our divorce publicly. Then don't announce it for now. Just get the formalities done. Vivian, you know that next week is the company's anniversary celebration. You have to attend with me. Jason curved his lips, and there was a hint of sarcasm in his smile. You chose a very precise time to make a fuss. But you should know that I am not the kind of person who can be easily manipulated. I didn't say anything, just quietly looking at Jason. We have done all the most intimate things between husband and wife. But men can separate sex and love very clearly. Women can't. That rain didn't wet my body, but my heart was thoroughly soaked. But Jason will never understand. Because he has never loved me. If you sign in divorce, then I will attend the anniversary celebration with you next week. If the company needs me to cooperate in any way, I can do it. I looked at him and even smiled gently as before. Jason, this doesn't have the slightest disadvantage for you. Okay. He looked at me deeply for a long time and finally nodded. After the company's anniversary celebration next week, I will sign. I didn't go back with Jason. Only on the day before the company's anniversary celebration did I fly back to Beijing. And in order to avoid being noticed and prevent gossip journalists from writing unfounded rumors about marital problems, I was picked up from the airport by his car and brought back to our wedding house. When I got out of the car, Monica came out to greet me like the hostess. "Vivian, you're finally back." She quickly stepped forward, took my hand, her eyes reddened and tears fell. I looked at her indifferently. Her clothes, jewelry, and makeup were obviously all carefully prepared. It was a kind of very low-key and comfortable luxury. Just like the attire of every lady and miss from a wealthy family when entertaining guests at home. I didn't say anything, just pulled my hand out. Monica had very beautiful nails. There was a gemstone ring and a diamond ring on her fair finger. But I had nothing on my hand. The wedding ring was taken off long ago. There was even a thin callus on the palm. When I first learned of Monica's existence, I was still stupidly secretly comparing myself with her in my heart. But now, no matter how beautiful and graceful she is, there is not the slightest ripple in my heart. I didn't look at her again and didn't answer. I carried the bag and walked forward, bypassing her. Monica bit her lip in embarrassment. The servant came forward to take it. "Madam, let me carry it." I avoided with a smile. "No need." The servant didn't dare to say more and looked at Jason with some difficulty. "Let her be." Jason withdrew his gaze and walked towards the main building. But I didn't go back to the main building with him. Instead, I went to the annex building for entertaining guests. "Vivian." Jason was finally angered. Perhaps it was because in front of a bunch of servants, what I did really made him and Monica embarrassed. I didn't stop and didn't answer. I had no desire to communicate with Jason at all. When Jason and I entered the banquet hall arm in arm, the atmosphere was at its climax. He was like a gentle and considerate husband, and I, as always, was a gentle and virtuous wife praised by everyone. When chatting with others, he interlocked his fingers with mine. From time to time, he would turn his head to look at me, his eyes and brows gentle. I would also lower my head and smile. When Jason and I entered the banquet hall arm in arm, the atmosphere was at its climax. He was like a gentle and considerate husband, and I, as always, was a gentle and virtuous wife praised by everyone. When chatting with others, he interlocked his fingers with mine. From time to time, he would turn his head to look at me, his eyes and brows gentle. I would also lower my head and smile. But in the past, that smile was sincere shyness and joy. Now it has put on a mask. I loathe such myself and despise such him. I just hope it will end sooner. But in the past, that smile was sincere shyness and joy. Now it has put on a mask. I loathe such myself and despise such him. I just hope it will end sooner. But at the end of the dinner, there was a plate of sashimi in front of me. A faint fishy smell came to my nose, and suddenly my stomach churned. I got up in a flustered manner and quickly went to the bathroom and vomited until I was dizzy. When I opened my eyes again, I was already in the hospital. Many people from the Gu family had come. Jason was sitting by my bedside. He held my hand and there was a rare joy on his face. "Vivian, do you know that you are pregnant?" When I opened my eyes again, I was already in the hospital. Many people from the Gu family had come. Jason was sitting by my bedside. He held my hand and there was a rare joy on his face. "Vivian, do you know that you are pregnant? It's just 45 days old." His voice was low and gentle, as tender as if he was afraid of scaring me. At that moment, I suddenly felt a little dazed. 3 years had passed in a flash, and there were only a few such times. And in 3 years, the number of times he met Monica was also extremely few. But every time, he was extremely gentle. "Grandma already knows about your pregnancy." He held my hand, and the smile on his lips was also gentle. "I have already asked someone to pick up the old lady. She is extremely happy." She was so excited on the phone that she cried. Lying on the bed, I suddenly shed tears too. Not having a child in 3 years after marriage was a worry for Grandma. But Grandma never knew that I didn't get pregnant because Jason said he didn't want a child. He had been very careful about contraception. But why is he so happy now? After the Gu family left, the ward became quiet. Jason brought me water. "Don't mention divorce again. Take good care of your body and have a peaceful pregnancy." I pushed away that cup of warm water. "I don't want this child." Jason's expression on his face didn't change at all. He lowered his head and looked down at me. "You tell Grandma yourself. As long as you are willing and let Grandma at such an age still be sad for you." Jason was certain that I would continue to endure injustice in order not to worry Grandma. But he forgot. When my grandma was young, she dared to take off her foot-binding cloth and resist her parents. She dared to break off the engagement and elope, and run thousands of miles away alone to seek refuge with relatives. After her husband became addicted to drugs, she dared to divorce resolutely and secretly take away her only daughter. Now that she is old, she looks fragile, kind, and uncontested. Jason pushed aside all the company's affairs. He began to wholeheartedly watch over me. I fainted at the anniversary celebration and was found to be pregnant. It had already spread like wildfire. Journalists and the media were tightly packed outside the hospital. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, the Gu family made a big show to pick me up. Everyone said I had a good life. With such a background, marrying into the Gu family, having a considerate husband, loving in-laws, and being pregnant, I can be called a winner in life. It's ridiculous to say that when the world judges a woman's success or failure, they often look at these chips attached to her by men. No one pays attention to her own self. No one will care about how turbulent her actual life is. Monica has left Beijing. Her maternal grandparents want her to go back and live there permanently. In the car, Jason held my hand. I told you from the beginning that between me and Monica, it's not romantic love. We grew up together. When we were young, in order to save me, she hit her forehead and there is still a scar. I liked her very much when I was young, but now, I just regard her as my elder sister. Vivian, there is really no reason for you to care about such a small matter. However, since you mind, then I will pay attention in the future. I will not meet Monica privately again and there will be no other contacts. Jason held my shoulder and tried to pull me into his arms. Let this matter end here. We have a child. From now on, let's live a good life as a family of 3, okay? In fact, at that time, I almost believed him. It is said that when a woman is pregnant, a hormone will be secreted. That hormone will make her reluctant to harm that little embryo in her belly. These days, I have been conflicted, tangled, and wavering. Grandma also told me, a husband can belong to someone else, but a child will always be your own. Seriously, at that moment I had an idea. Perhaps being found pregnant at this time is an opportunity given to me and Jason by heaven. No woman wants to kill her own child with her own hands. I am no exception. But just when I was wavering, Monica found a way to contact me. You know why Jason suddenly stopped using contraception from half a year ago? I was stunned for a moment. It seemed that it was indeed from that time. Jason no longer deliberately used contraception, because at that time I decided to get a divorce. You must be thinking that when I decided to divorce, Jason should be more careful about contraception. Monica suddenly laughed when she said this. Her laugh was a bit harsh and a bit desolate. Vivian, I can't give birth. If I could have children, how could Jason have compromised and married you back then? So, do you know how your child came about? He is only fortunate to come into this world because he is paving the way for me. I shouldn't have told you this at this time. I should have waited until the melon is ripe and the child is born. But Vivian. There was a jealous hatred of ruining everything in her voice. I regret it. I would rather destroy this way than let you give birth to Jason's child. I sat there and felt very cold. That chill seemed to spread from the soles of my feet to my whole body in an instant. But I didn't cry either. Instead, there was a strange sense of relief. I clearly perceived that all my emotions and entanglements with Jason were completely let go so lightly. Then have you ever thought that if I listened to you and insisted on having this child? You are not this kind of person. You seem gentle, generous, forbearing, and inclusive. But there can't be a single grain of sand in your eyes. I suddenly laughed. Monica, thank you for telling me these. Vivian, don't hate me. I just love him too much. You know, love is always selfish and blind. I didn't speak. I cut off the call, stood up, and walked to the window. In the garden at dusk, almost all the roses had withered. A gust of wind blew, and the last one on the branch in the cold also fell into the soil. The flowers have fallen. The dream should also completely wake up. On the day when Jason had dinner with Vivian for the last time, she wore a light green dress. That dress looked a bit familiar. It took him a while to remember. When they first met, Vivian seemed to be wearing a similar one. At that time, he had failed in his struggle with his family. Monica married abroad in despair. He went to meet Vivian Young.she and wanted to find an excuse to get rid of her. But before he could utter those unbearable and cruel words, she just reddened her eyes. Jason had never seen a girl shed so many tears. Her eyes were very big, and those tears gathered in her eyes. After a while, they fell one by one. She choked and said, I'm sorry. I really didn't know that you were forced to come and see me. I will go back and tell the elders in my family to dissolve our engagement. She was so embarrassed by his harsh words that she cried nonstop. But she kept apologizing to him. Jason watched her stand up crying and knock over the coffee. The stain of coffee soiled her light green dress. She lowered her head to wipe it, and tears fell one by one. Somehow, his heart was slightly touched. Thinking of the hopeless love. Thinking of Monica who got married. He actually felt a kind of decadence of going with the flow. Your name is Vivian, right? She was stunned for a moment and nodded. Yes. Do you want to marry me? She clutched the corner of her skirt and pursed her lips. Her long, curly and thick eyelashes drooped down, covering her slightly reddened eyes. She nodded very lightly, but her face flushed. Then let's get married. Her eyes suddenly widened, and there was astonishment and surprise in her eyes. But just now, he smiled, leaned back on the chair and looked at her lazily. The descendants of the Gu family all have good looks. Moreover, at that time he was still young and energetic, and a little flirtatious. When he looked at her and smiled like that, she was so shy. Just teasing you, Sister Vivian. Don't go and complain to my grandma. She quickly shook her head. No, I won't complain. After saying that, her earlobes were completely red, and she didn't dare to look at him again. After the date, he sent her home. When getting out of the car, he took her hand. 3 months later, they got engaged. 7 months later, she married him. And now, she has been married to him for 3 years. There is their child in her belly. Jason felt a very strange emotion surging in his heart. This child came as expected within his plan. He should be happy. But that happiness seemed to have other meanings. These days, he couldn't help thinking from time to time. Will the child be a boy or a girl? Of course, it's best to be a boy. But if it's a girl who looks a lot like Vivian, it should be good too. But why would he hope that the child looks like Vivian? His original plan was that this child would call Monica Mom in the future. Jason vaguely felt that some things seemed to be getting out of control. But he actually didn't want to rein in at the brink. He inexplicably wanted to lose control completely. That dinner was cooked by Vivian herself. She didn't have morning sickness that day and was in good spirits. So he let her do as she pleased. She even accompanied him and drank a little fruit wine that was harmless to pregnant women. When he was slightly drunk, he felt that Vivian seemed extraordinarily beautiful. Did you put on makeup? Just a very light touch. The color of your lipstick is very beautiful. Thank you. She smiled with slightly curved eyes. He also smiled. He stood up and walked behind her, placing his hands on the armrests of the chair beside her. Jason lowered his head, and his tall nose brushed against her thick sideburns. It was an intimate and charming scene. Shall I ask the servant to move your things back to the master bedroom? She didn't nod, but she didn't shake her head either. She just picked up her glass and clinked it with his again. Later, he took her for a walk in the garden. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse, and there was a layer of slightly withered rose petals on the lawn. She was very quiet along the way. Only the early autumn wind blew the hem of her long skirt. Jason followed behind her and suddenly felt a bit drunk. He felt that the scene looked very peaceful and beautiful. Later, he couldn't remember clearly whether she went back to the master bedroom. He slept very deeply and for a long time. When he woke up, it was already noon the next day. He turned over and subconsciously reached out to the side of the bed. Vivian. The hangover made his head hurt a little. He barely managed to sit up. The bedroom was empty. There was only one pillow on the big bed. She didn't come to live here last night, and Jason didn't know at that time. Not just last night. From now on, day and night, Vivian will never come back here again. When I came out after the surgery, Grandma was waiting outside to pick me up and leave the hospital. I was wrapped in a thick coat, but I was still shivering with cold. Grandma put the warm water bag on my lower abdomen and held my hand tightly. Her body was a bit stooped and her legs were bent. But her hand was still very warm and strong. It seemed to give me great courage to move forward. I told the Gu family back then that we don't want any repayment of kindness. I leaned on Grandma's shoulder and acted spoiled. If you feel sorry for me, then make a bowl of egg custard for me. I haven't had Grandma's egg custard for a long time. When we reached the hospital entrance, I saw Jason's car. He got out of the car, his face was cold and stern, and the corners of his lips were tightly pursed. Grandma subconsciously wanted to protect me behind her. But I gently shook my head. Jason strode up to me and reached out to hold my shoulder. Vivian, where's the child? I had an abortion. How dare you, Vivian? He held my shoulder and his fingers gradually exerted more force. I saw his pale and livid face. There was anger and pain churning in his eyes. I pried off his fingers one by one. Please sign quickly and complete the divorce procedures. I won't divorce you. Jason's voice was deep and cold, word by word. Then let's go to court. If you want to make a big deal out of it. Turning what was once a so-called beautiful story into a joke after dinner. I smiled indifferently. Then I'll accompany you. Jason still wanted to say something. But his phone suddenly rang. I vaguely heard Monica's name again. Then his expression changed. I know. I'll go there immediately. He answered in an urgent tone. After hanging up the phone, he looked at me again. Vivian, wait for me to come back. Let's have a good talk. But I didn't wait for him to come back and talk to him. I directly went to find Mrs. Gu. I didn't hide anything and didn't add any embellishments. I just repeated those words that Monica said verbatim. Mrs. Gu is a very decisive woman. Just like when she broke up the lovers neatly back then and forced Monica to marry far away. Now she takes action again. Jason and I quickly ended our legal marital relationship. And Monica, under Mrs. Gu's thunderous methods, the Shu family couldn't withstand the pressure and started forcing her to marry again. I heard that she even tried to commit suicide. Jason stayed by her side in the hospital for a day and a night. I also heard that Jason was determined to marry Monica. Mrs. Gu was so angry that she gave him 2 slaps and wanted to drive him out of the Gu family. But all of this has nothing to do with me anymore. I followed Grandma back to the small county thousands of miles away. I renovated and took care of Grandma's small yard again. I plan to plant roses all over the yard in the spring of next year. When I got out of the small confinement period, Jason suddenly came looking for me. Grandma didn't open the yard door. He stayed outside for a long time and didn't leave until early in the morning, and the next morning, when I went out to get milk, I saw him again. In the early winter weather, he was only wearing a thin coat, while I was wrapped in one of Grandma's cotton robes because I was very afraid of the cold. Neighbors looked at him curiously and stopped in their tracks. After all, in our small county, it's rare to see such a handsome and wealthy man. But I only took one look at him and then shifted my gaze. Jason didn't speak either, but he followed me all the way. After I got the milk, I bought breakfast and turned back. He also followed me all the way until I reached the yard gate. Vivian. He finally spoke and called my name. I didn't stop. I pushed open the yard door and went in. I turned around and was about to close it. Jason took a step forward and reached out to block it. Vivian, Monica is going to get married next spring. When I grew up, it seemed that I had never lost my temper with anyone. I didn't even have an argument with anyone. But this time, I suddenly took action. The warm milk was splashed on his face. His extremely expensive coat and the cashmere sweater inside were all soiled. He was a bit stunned and frowned tightly. Vivian. Jason, if the person she is going to marry next spring is you, then I still respect you as a man. But now it seems that you don't love her that much either. After all, giving up the identity of the heir of the Gu family, you can marry her. And you can't bear to. Vivian's words were only half right. He really didn't love Monica that much. But it wasn't because he couldn't bear to give up the so-called heir status. He just really, already, no longer liked her as much as he did when he was young. After Vivian got pregnant, Jason actually thought about it. The 3 of them, a family of 3, would live well. That once dirty and despicable thought would be buried in his heart forever. Because of pity and affection, he crossed that line with Monica late at night in a foreign country. And on an impulse, he gave Monica a promise about a child and marriage. But in fact, he regretted it very early. But Monica told Vivian. Then, without hesitation, she got rid of that child. And at the moment when he learned that the child was gone, there was only one thought in Jason's heart. That was, he couldn't keep Vivian anymore. Just like the roses, once they fall, they fall. But Vivian was everywhere in their wedding house. The servants would often blurt out things like what the madam is like, what the madam likes, what if the madam knew. And there was himself. Every time he returned home at 6 o'clock. Clearly knowing that that person had already left, he still hoped that it was her who would come out to greet him. He once thought that Vivian was a cup of bland, always warm water at a constant temperature of 45 degrees. An unimportant existence. But how can people live without water? He would often think of that last dinner they had. The way she looked after drinking a little fruit wine. The color of the lipstick she wore that day was very beautiful. He would often think that if later when they were taking a walk, he went to hold her hand. If he hugged her from behind. If he gently called out, "Wife." Would she soften her heart and give him another chance? He would also often think that if he hadn't forgotten to pick her up that day in the heavy rain. If he appeared in front of her in time. Would the ending of the story be completely rewritten? But talking about these again has no meaning at all. He could only tell himself to look forward. Vivian is still single. Vivian has rejected many men who pursued her. After all, Vivian loved him very much back then. He would always go to her place 2 or 3 times a year. But when he went to look for her for the 9th time, the same story played out again. But the male lead in that story was no longer him. The rain was very heavy that day, just like the time he forgot to pick her up. But this time, the male lead didn't make the same mistake as him. In the pouring rain, the man's car stopped steadily in the rain. Vivian was standing under the eaves to take shelter from the rain. When she saw the car coming, she wanted to run over and get in. But the man waved his hand repeatedly to stop her. First, he got out of the car in the rain and got soaked through to get an umbrella. Then he quickly walked up to her. The umbrella he opened was almost all tilted towards her, protecting her and getting into the car first. It was actually a very short distance, only 2 or 3 steps. But the man couldn't bear for her to get even a little bit of rain. He would rather get soaked through himself. Jason just sat in the car like that, staring blankly at that scene. The windshield wipers swung back and forth quickly. The whole world was almost swallowed up by the heavy rain. The car carrying Vivian sped away and was gone forever. And that heavy rain years ago. The heavy rain when he forgot Vivian. But after a long time, it poured down on him like a downpour. Jason smiled bleakly. He started the car and turned it around. The car was like an arrow leaving the bow, piercing through the dense rain curtain. At a certain moment, he seemed to see Vivian, who was once young and tender, again. At that time, they had just gotten engaged. His mother didn't like her, but his grandma liked her very much. At the engagement ceremony, Grandma once told her, "Vivian, if Jason bullies you, come and tell Grandma. Grandma will support you." So at that time, every time he teased her until she was shy, she would always say, "I'll go and complain to Grandma." He couldn't help but smile. And he remembered their wedding night. She cried because of the pain. He held her and coaxed her. Deliberately joking, he said, "Why don't you say you'll go and complain to Grandma?" She cried and laughed, and then angrily pounced over and bit him. And he lowered his head and kissed her, and then she obediently closed her eyes under him again. Jason finally understood. In fact, when he first saw Vivian back then, he had already fallen in love with her. It's just a pity that people often sigh and feel sorry when the flowers fall. And when the flowers are in full bloom, they don't seem to be very happy or cherish them. In the second year after Vivian divorced him, all the roses in the wedding house withered. But in the small town thousands of miles away, the yard of Grandma's house was full of roses. But those flowers that bloomed very well no longer belonged to him. Jason suddenly raised his face. He was afraid that he would awkwardly shed tears. Right in this pouring rain. In Vivian's new life that has already begun.